So, one of the things we really wanted to build out in the story, we wanted people to understand and appreciate about Leo is that his decades long project is not just about Washington and the Supreme Court. It is about shaping the judiciary, shaping the legal system in the states as well, states all around the country, because states have their own state Supreme Courts, which are either appointed or elected. They have their own state attorneys general, which can bring lawsuits overturning policies in Washington. Those state AGs can be really influential, especially when they come together, form these coalitions, and then sue, say, the EPA or the SEC or sue some regulatory body in Washington. So Leo early on takes aim at Missouri. And Missouri is important for a couple of reasons. One, Missouri is about to, at the time of this episode, Missouri is about to put a new judge on its state Supreme Court. There are several candidates for this, not for office, but produced by this panel. And I'll get to that in a second. And then the governor picks one of the options and puts him on the court. And Leo did not like the candidate that Governor Matt Blunt, then at the time, Governor Matt Blunt, a rising star in Missouri, did not like the candidate he was leaning toward. And so Leo plays bare knuckle politics and essentially says, if you put Patricia Bridge on the court, you're going to feel the fury of the conservative base like you've never felt before. And Leo is pressuring Blunt's chief of staff, a guy named Ed Martin, but really it's putting pressure on the governor. But it wasn't just about this one judge. Missouri was at the forefront of a model for putting judges on the bench that was trying to stay out of politics. Some states, like Wisconsin, they elect their judges. Some states appoint their judges. There's a panel of experts. They all come together. They say, these are the three most qualified people. You, governor, take the pick. Leo and his allies did not like this model. They didn't. They thought it was wrong. They thought it took the power out of the voters' hands. They thought it was corrupt.
It's also something that would be harder for them to control and
Oh,
intervene
yeah.
in, as this incident shows.
Of course, yeah. No political action committees or dark money or outside donations in this commission model. This model is literally called the Missouri Plan because Missouri was the one that pioneered it and promoted it, and other states took it and ran with it. And so Leo and his allies also want to get rid of the Missouri Plan. They want it to go to elections that are like your elections for governor or for senator, you name it. And so he really sounds like a sort of old school political boss in messages he's sending to Governor Matt Blunt's office. Now, what's interesting about this Missouri vignette in our story is that Leo does not succeed. It is an example of a defeat. And we thought it was important to be very accurate and clear on that. Just like with Robert Moses, they're not infallible, these powerful, influential figures. They lose, they face setbacks. But what's interesting is how do they learn from them? How do they take that knowledge that they've gleaned from this humbling setback and move on? And we saw it with what Leo and his allies went on to do in states like North Carolina, in states like Wisconsin, focusing on states where there are elections for judges and then building these different pieces of infrastructure, outside groups and donations and Federalist Society chapters in the states to try to change the composition of those state Supreme Courts. And they did do that in Wisconsin, and they did do that in North Carolina as well.
Yeah, and you take us inside North Carolina and other states and how this plays out, and all the way up to the Janet Przejewicz race that just gone through in 2023. It stood out to me for a couple of reasons. One is that, first of all, I identified with the poor chief of staff. I will at another time tell the story of how I came under a similar pressure campaign from another notable figure when I was the chief of staff in Congress. It really, the language that you unearthed of the email, it is so amazing. Leo writes to this chief of staff, to Martin, he will have, speaking of the governor, zero juice on the national scene if he ends up picking a judge who is a disgrace. Sounds very Trumpy in there. If this happens, there will be fury from the conservative base, the likes of which you and the governor have never seen. And after Blunt appoints Breckinridge anyway and goes against Leo, Leo piled on. He wrote, your boss is a coward, and conservatives have neither the time nor the patience for the likes of him. But here's the stinger on it, is that Blunt defied Leo. And a few months later, he surprised everybody by announcing he wasn't running for re-election at 37 years old. As you write in your story, his political career was over. So what really stood out to me from that is that Leo seems to always be thinking long term. Yes, this was a fight about this judge, this particular appointment in one state, but it was really about a much larger enterprise. First of all, about this whole Missouri approach. And he wanted to make sure that at the state level, he could always be the one who had the money, who could run the political campaigns, who could make the decisions behind the scenes. He doesn't like any setup where there's political independence. He wants to be able to run it, and this is a 10 and 20-year plan to put himself in position to do so. In a way, he's not that sorry that he lost that battle. He's now able to go around and say, and look what happened to this guy. He defied me, and poof, his career was over. I can't help but think that only empowered Leo further. Another really fascinating thing that comes out, and this begins to invoke some of the work of your colleagues like Justin Elliott, previous guest on this show, is the den mother story. What is this den mother thing?
The den mother tagline comes from George Conway, of course. Today is known for being one of the most outspoken, never figures out there. Former husband to Kellyanne Conway, the Trump pollster, still pretty prominent in Republican circles. But what made George such a great interview was until about 2015, George was a dyed-in-the-wool member of the conservative legal movement. Like these were his people. Leonard Leo was someone he knew and knew fairly well, to hear George tell it. And George was, and Kellyanne together were big donors to the Federalist Society. They were in the donor tier, which is laid out in the Federalist Society's annual reports, between $50,000 and $100,000. So we're not talking chump change here, over multiple years. And George, as he told me, was actually in these rooms where Leo, the den mother, came out. And one example of this is there was this dinner that Leo would help organize during the annual Federalist Society National Convention. This is nerd prom for conservative and libertarian lawyers. It happens every year, usually end of the year, like late November or so, usually in Washington. And for a time, Conway was a celebrity at these things because he's well known. He's a prominent litigator. He's a big donor to the Federalist Society. And he was invited to a couple of these dinners that Leo would put together. And these dinners were just the perfect little encapsulation of this den mother moniker, or really of how Leo operated in these elite circles, which is very fancy restaurant, small guest list, and the invitees would be one or two justices. They would be maybe some prominent political figures. Scott Pruitt, the former Oklahoma Attorney General, EPA chief under Trump, attended one of them. Don McGahn, the incoming White House counsel for Trump, attended one of these dinners in late 2016. But then you had like major donors to the Federalist Society. Leo didn't actually have to whisper to the donors about his friendships, his relationships with Alito or Scalia or Thomas. He brought them all together in one place, and it was just there to be seen. And Leo would say, I'm showing them a good time. These are all my friends. These are all my professional contacts. Conway said that may be true, but also it goes both ways. It burnishes Leo's influence, makes him look even more powerful to the donors, helps perhaps the donors want to give more money when they see how connected and influential Leo is, but it all feeds into itself.
He's Horace Slughorn. He's running the Slug Club, and why say what you can show? Because the story of these dinners, everybody except for maybe the justices is bragging about it. The word gets around over the last 9 or 10 years. We have a figure in here. Tax records show that between 2014 and 2020, the groups that he runs raised more than $600 million. And as Senator Whitehouse said on this show, that we know about, there's plenty that we don't know. That's probably the tip of the iceberg. What are they doing during this time? What we know is a lot of care and feeding of these justices, a lot of cultivation of this kind of like, it works both ways, cultivation of keeping them happy, cultivating the donor base, showing how much juice they have. And then a lot of this even further behind the scenes work down several rungs in the judicial firmament, where they're getting involved in these attorneys general races and these prosecutorial races, these judge races. They're really shaping who's getting picked. And if you are a political figure in the Republican Party and you do anything to defy Leonard Leo and his will and his list, your career looks short. And he's probably glad that he had that setback with Matt Blunt. It's a realization. You and I, again, when we were talking before the show, I was likening it to a Moneyball insight that he had, that there was an undervalued rung of not only the judicial level, but the political level in American life, where there's all of these incredibly powerful, influential positions that he could steer. And you quote Carolyn Fred, another former guest on this show, saying that it was really the left, this is her quote, even though we are somewhat court worshippers, never understood the potency of the courts as a political machine. On the right, they did. And as much as I hate to say it, you've really got to admire what they achieved. And that seems to be basically the mode he was in this period, which very much included Donald Trump essentially turning over all of his judicial selections, cut from whole cloth, to Leonard Leo.
Yeah, the 2015, 2016, 2017 little window there is a fascinating small period if we're looking at the larger timeline of this story. It's fascinating because this candidate emerges as the Republican nominee in Donald Trump, who, frankly, in so many ways is anathema to Leonard Leo and to the conservative legal movement. The guy is mostly illiterate about the Constitution and has no problems wiping his nose with it if it gets in the way of something that he wants to do. However, he's going to be the guy. He is going to be the nominee. And you see a level of pragmatism and strategic thinking there, strategic repositioning in real time by the conservative legal folks, by the Federalist Society types, Leo being at the top of the list, to say, look, if this guy's going to be the guy, then we need to get behind him and we need to figure out what we can do to try to get him over the finish line. You know, they don't want Hillary Clinton becoming president for a lot of reasons, but chief among them is that they don't want a Democrat filling Antonin Scalia's empty seat on the Supreme Court. That is the seminal moment of the 2016 campaign for the legal folks, is that Scalia dies, this seat is vacant, the fate of the Supreme Court.
And I will say that there's I don't recall seeing this, but I just remember it from the time that there was still a question in the Republican Party about whether the most conservative elements of the base would accept Donald Trump, whether his nomination would fracture the party. And there was a belief at the time that he was actually a moderate, that he was a closet moderate. As a matter of fact, polling in 2016 showed that a majority of Republican voters thought he was a moderate. And of course, it was popular in Republican circles to say, oh, once he's in office, we'll calm him right the heck down. Don't you worry, he'll become normalized. But the concern from the right wasn't, is this guy a nut job? Is he stable? Is he a very stable genius? The concern was, is he conservative? Is he going to give us another David Souter? And it was an incredibly critical moment in his path to the presidency, where to quell that political fire, he released a list of justices that he would potentially nominate. Here is the list. Who handed him the list? Who handed him the keys to persuading and mollifying the conservative base? You guessed it, Leonard Leo. So it is this kind of, it's a pragmatism. It's a kind of shifting, like this is where the wind is blowing, but he also enabled it. He also captured Donald Trump along the way.
Yeah. And if there are two big themes that I've always pulled out of that moment, the moment where Leo decides we're going to help Trump and the list comes into play to try to get those wobbly evangelicals, to get those wobbly conservative legal types out there on board with Trump. Those two themes are this. One is the one you just described, the sort of sense of pragmatism. Again, I don't think from all of the reporting that we've done that Leonard Leo is necessarily a big personal fan of Donald Trump, or stylistically, personality-wise, the way they choose to live their lives. I don't necessarily know if they would be pals. even though I think Leo respects Trump to some degree. He says, this is the guy who we got to get on board with. This is the guy who's going to get us what we want, which is a conservative Supreme Court, which is conservative judges all the way down the list. But also, Leo could not have stepped aside, come up with a list of names if he had not put this pipeline into motion, built the pipeline and then put it into motion starting in the early 1990s. This is getting back to what we talked about earlier with the Casey decision. No more suitors was the rallying cry. No more David suitors, sort of Republican imposter, conservative imposter justices. He could not have come up with the list, incredibly put it out there and said, this list is going to allay the concerns of all of those evangelicals, those voters who are so afraid of you, Donald Trump. If he had not built all of this stuff, if he had not played this long game, Leo did not build the pipeline thinking, okay, one day a former Democrat real estate billionaire from New York City is going to be the Republican nominee, and I'm going to need to give him a list. Like, he didn't know that was going to happen. There's an element of chance and luck here. When that moment presented himself, all of that long game, all of those 30 years of work, he could come up with that list, and it all, built to that. The list was a product of that. And obviously it worked. The polling after the election showed that the Supreme Court was near or at the top of the list for evangelical voters for sure, and lots of other ones as well.
Right. It did work. It was his doing. You could argue that his intervention and I used the word quelling before, but his quelling of this unrest in the base is what gave Donald Trump the presidency. And the payback, you also put this in the story, was that Donald Trump appointed 231 judges to the bench in his 4 years. Of all of them, this includes the circuit courts and the Supreme Court, 6% were former or current Federalist Society members. You think about where Leonard Leo started off in the Federalist Society, and 30 years later, this is the payoff. And yet, most disturbing of all to someone like me, at this moment, it's like, Bobby Fischer, you're the world chess champion. I resign. I'm going to become a hermit. Something really strange happens in this 2020, 2021 period. All of a sudden, Leonard Leo gets a $1.6 billion contribution from an even shadowier figure than Harlan Crow. You thought Harlan Crow was the Marvel supervillain of the right-wing firmament. Yeah, let me introduce you to Barry Side. That's all I can do because we know nothing else about this man. He is a mystery wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in a vest. I don't know anything about him except the fact that he gave $1.6 billion, no strings attached, or maybe some strings attached, who knows, to Leonard Leo. And Leonard Leo announces that he is stepping away from this role that he has built over 40 years. And now his focus is going to be something else, and something that I find very disturbing given his track record. What happens here?
Yeah, he steps away at his Bobby Fischer world champion moment, but rather than fading into the sunset and, I don't know, retiring and collecting stamps or wine for the rest of his life, he decides he wants to broaden his mission. He decides it is his role, it is his calling to take everything that he's learned from the late 80s to 2020 and apply those strategies, apply that thinking, apply those lessons to as much of the rest of American society as he possibly can. He wants to take the Federalist Society for Law model and start building the Federalist Society for everything else. And that is the thing that we really wanted to try to better understand reporting on him. And we did some reporting earlier this year on this subject, and then we did some more with this most recent set of stories in the podcast, of course, about Leo. But yeah, Leo is not resting on his laurels. He could. And I think that the donation that Barry Side basically put Leo in charge of and trusted him with, $1.6 billion, was very much a recognition of what Leo had done at the Supreme Court, the rest of the federal courts, the state courts, a recognition of his life's work up to that point. But it was also very much a mandate to take this money and go out and do all of those things that you've done in the courts to everything else: education, media, electoral politics, the culture wars, LGBT rights. They would call it woke gender identity ideology, that kind of language. But yeah, to go out and do more of it and to spend more money. 600 million between 2014 and 2020. That's pretty small compared to 1.6 billion just put into the bank account of this group, Marble Freedom Trust, of which Leonard Leo is the trustee. So it's a pretty staggering point in the timeline. And honestly, it was the event that really snapped me personally into focus on writing about. I followed him during the Trump years.
Right.
I understood what he did. I had a pretty good sense of who he was. But then when this 1.6 billion comes along, that was, he's not just the 1.6 billion. That's not the only thing that matters, but it put this punctuation point at the end that really made me think, okay, wait a minute. This guy is even more powerful than I realized. This guy is even more worthy of some real classic ProPublica reporting than I thought before.
I would never tell an experienced investigative journalist what to do next, but I have a feeling that you're not done, because for me, this was an oh shit moment for me. This realization that one of the most important figures, as I said at the top, in American politics over the last 40 years has embarked on this new quest, this very consequential quest to entirely remake culture and politics in America. And he has a track record that suggests he knows exactly how to do projects like this over the long term. Mm-hmm. He has a ton of money that we know about. And I just want to commend to people the deep dive we did with Senator Whitehouse last year on just the tip of the iceberg that we know about, the potential for foreign sources of money, dark money, Putin money. Again, I'm going to sound Rumsfeldian about this, but there are unknown unknowns here that I think should give everyone pause. Let me get you out of here on this. Again, I don't want to give away the store on what is a fascinating read or listen if people want to hear this as a podcast. But I love to ask investigative reporters. It's like that scene from All the President's Men where they're in the Library of Congress and they're just like, they're looking at this stuff and they're just going through the papers. Like Robert Caro says, read every damn page.
Yep.
Do you have a moment when you were looking at one of the damn pages in the thousands that you must have consulted and you just, or maybe an interview you were doing where you just went, oh my gosh, what did I just see? What did I just hear? Is there something that really took you aback?
Oh God, there were so many of those moments that there were so many. We worked
like picking among your children. I get it.
Yeah, there was one really esteemed scholar. I'm not going to name because I don't want to. There's some sourcing stuff there. I don't want to get him in trouble. But there's one particular very esteemed scholar who, to our mind, was like, he's his own guy. He's an award-winning. He's at a really impressive university, famous person in his world.
Yeah.
And when we reached out to him, we didn't hear back, but ultimately realized that he had sent our request or sought permission or whatever from Leo HQ and basically was told, no, you don't need to do that, or we don't want you to do that, or whatever the reason was. We did not hear back. And it really underscored for us this sort of level of, I don't know if it's control or interconnect. There was just a real sense, I think for some people it was a fear, some people it was a sense of caution that you did not want to step out of line when it came to Leonard Leo. You did not want to be seen as speaking out of turn to a member of the press about him. And that just happened over and over again. And it occurred in a way that to a degree that I have never experienced. And I've written about tons of prominent public figures, politicians, major donors, you name it, other activist operatives all across the political spectrum. I've never encountered that as much as we encountered on this story.
And perhaps that's why you ended up titling your piece, We Don't Talk About Leonard, the man behind the right's Supreme Court supermajority, which is an outstanding read. You can find it on the ProPublica website. You can also find the podcast version of this, which I love podcasts. I do a podcast. I'm a fan. Worth listening to. Andy Kroll, thanks so much for you and your full team, all your work, and for being on Beyond Politics.
It's a real pleasure. I love this conversation. Thanks for having me.